Thank you, Sinamar. Well, I hope our co-researchers can join. I think they are having some problems, but yeah, they will join soon. So our co-researchers are Quilla Becerra, Valentin Luna, Domingo Campo, and Percy is also helping with us with the analysis. So thank you all and Gia, of course, the Gia team. So thank you all for for this collaborative work. And it's a pleasure to be here in Tropilunch. Feels like home. And well, I will start sharing my screen. Okay. So one thing before I start, this presentation is in Spanish, thinking that Kian, Domingo, and Valentin will join us very soon, and so that they can follow the presentation. But I will speak in English, and I hope most of you can. Oh, there he is. Hi, Valentin. Perfect. So this presentation is in Spanish, but I will speak in English. This is el señor Valentin. It's already connected, and Domingo will connect very soon, I think, and Kia, we are waiting for her too. Oops. Okay. So this presentation will basically include some introduction and objectives of the research, the research questions and the theoretical analytical framework, the methods, and some preliminary results and conclusions. Very rapidly, like this research is relevant because the Amazon has been the focus of many initiatives directed to promote infrastructure, and this is, for example, very much reflected in the UNASUR's Latin America-wide IRSA, which promote like a series of projects directed to integration and modernization of the Amazon, as they say. But this is causing lots of impacts and lots of conflicts. And so GIA, the governance infrastructure in the Amazon group and project, we have been working the last years to analyze how the governance of this infrastructure projects and processes and decision-making outcomes are being done. And so some preliminary results from the work done through the years 2019 and 2020, like basically found that some initiatives such as mobilization and political negotiation and research and education and law enforcement and policy approaches are very much important for social environmental actors to deal with these projects and try to promote a sustainable development and defend local people's rights. And so in this context, this project emerged as a way to analyze the effectiveness of the strategies that social environmental actors such as indigenous groups implement to promote governance in the infrastructure sector. And so this research is done participatively and collaboratively with co-researchers from communities that are directly involved in these processes. Quilla Becerra in Colombia, and Valentin Luna and Domingo Campo in Bolivia. And so the idea is that the ultimate goal is to produce scientific evidence and communication materials that be useful for these groups to keep on their efforts, basically, and lucha for a better governance. And so this study focuses on 4 cases in 4 countries. But for today's presentation, I will focus on the 2 cases that we are working more in depth and that we are working with indigenous co-researchers, which is the case of Bolivia with the Mancomunidad de Comunidades and how this Mancomunidad dealt with this hydroelectric project in the called Chepete Bala. And the Colombia case, which is about resguardo indígena, INGA, that is dealing with 2 road projects. And so we have, moving on with the theoretical framework, we are basically trying to combine the political ecology framework and the ecological modernization framework to have a constructive but critical approach to infrastructure governance. And so some of the questions that this constructive but a critical approach lead us to is how diverse actors, objectives, and strategies fit in with each of those approaches, and how social environmental actors and pro-infrastructure actors interact with each other. Is it like a collaboration, or is it a zero-sum power game? And what does effectiveness really mean, right? Like, is it to stop the project? Is it to improve the project? Is it to like, and so the first question is about the position and the objectives of the actors. What was the position of the objectives that these groups, specifically like Resguardo and the Mancomunidad, took in to face the project? Did they, what did they want to achieve, right? And so we have to consider here the 2 approaches that we talked about before, the ecological modernization and political ecology. So also, if there were trade-offs between the infrastructure objectives by the infrastructure-oriented actors and the social environmental actors, trade-offs, win-win situations, and how the position evolved through time, so adaptive governance. And so just to say that this is not too much like a binary approach, because there are, as you can see in this arrow, there are many like linkages, and we acknowledge the fact that there can exist both trade-offs and win-win situations. So it's not like a dichotomy, right? But anyway, just to differentiate priorities. And so the second question is about strategies, what kind of strategies were implemented and how were they implemented. And so we have a special focus on coalitions as a very important organizational strategy, and political mobilization as a very important instrumental strategy. So organizational strategies like that focus on like how actors organize themselves, and instrumental strategies that focus on how actors act and influence directly the decision-making process. And also we look at power and how power dynamics occurs between actors that are social environmental oriented and actors that are infrastructure oriented. Synergies between strategies, and especially 3 types of power that we are looking at: collective power, or power with, political power, and economic power. And again, the adaptive strategy, how actors adapted their strategies. And the third question is about the effectiveness. To what extent these strategies actually contributed to reach the desired objectives, and we consider that unexpected and indirect results can occur. And also we ask who wins, basically, right? But considering that even though elites are likely to win, like following the political ecology approach and like the literature that we have reviewed, we also consider following some thinkers such as Foucault, that under very particular circumstances, power can be in everybody. And finally, the fourth question is about how the context and exogenous factors influenced all this: objectives, strategies, implementation, effectiveness. And we look especially at political and economic context, so political and economic systems, and we approach them as from a historical approach, right? That doesn't mean that we consider that there are other types of exogenous factors that can contribute or influence too, but we give a priority to these ones. Not to bore you with this. This is basically like the visual framework that about the that basically summarizes everything that we just said about the research questions. So structural power, structural power relations, exogenous factors influencing positions, strategies, and finally outcomes, and how all this evolves and adapts according to results and effectiveness results as well. The methods, as I said, this is a participatory research. It's done directly with Quilla Becerra from Colombia and Valentin Luna and Domingo Campos from Bolivia. These are very important actors in this research, and they have done a fantastic job collecting information in their communities and in their indigenous territories about how these infrastructure projects were dealt with. And so I just want to take a moment to thank you them for their efforts, and they have been involved since the beginning of this study, like in the design of the objectives of the study, also like developing the data collection tools, and they are involved as well in the this last phase, which is the analysis of the results. So we basically like do, well, through Quilla and through Valentin and through Domingo, we achieved many interviews to different communities that are part of the resguardo in Colombia and Bancomunidad in Bolivia. But we also interviewed them as key actors and key informants, and we are completing right now interviews to other actors such as the government, NGOs, and people that know about these processes. We cover most, or we consider all the communities of the Mancomunidad, all the cabildos of the resguardo, and we make sure that women are interviewed, and also we consider not only the comuneros, the people from the communities that were directly involved in the processes, but also people from the communities that were not as involved, so to have this external perspective as well. So these are the interviews in Bolivia, and these are the interviews in Colombia. And so to the important part, preliminary results. So one first finding is that in both cases, this the position and the objective of these indigenous groups ended up being very unified and directed to stop the project. The main arguments were like that these projects will like affect the territory, will disappear. You know, the culture, they would affect the crops, the animals, the lands, and will, very importantly, they will like infringe their rights as indigenous peoples. For example, the prior consultation. And in Colombia, there is this very interesting thing to highlight, is that they wanted to do some sort of anti-modernization, anti-ecological modernization, which is because what they wanted was like this like very small roads that are basically only for very small cars to fit in there, and this was because they wanted to keep their territorial autonomy. If they knew that if they allowed a very like modern and, you know, large scale road project, other actors will be able to take over the territory. So the other thing is that even though there was a unified position, it was not as simple as it sounds. The position was the process to get to this position was complex, was dynamic, was changed over time, and many actors in both countries like changed positions or like evolved in their positions through time. For example, in Bolivia, some comuneros at the beginning were very much supporting the project because the government had like promised benefits such as electricity, water, etc. But at the end, they changed their minds because the government actually didn't fulfill these promises, and also because the Mancomunidad got strong as an organization, right? In Colombia, not the resguardo indígena, but some campesinas, comunidades campesinas, actually rethought their position about the road. And at the beginning, they were very much like supporting the road, but at the end, after rethinking some of the indirect consequences, they changed their minds to some extent. So there was a process from ecological modernization to political ecology. And so this is just to say that positions are changing over time, and in both cases there were actors in favor of the project, mostly the government and the companies, of course, and some comunidades in Colombia, and basically other resguardos indígenas that are not Yunguillo were in favor of the project. Yunguillo was the only resguardo that was in favor. Sorry, Yunguillo was the only resguardo indígena that was against the project. And in Bolivia, there are two comunidades from the Mancomunidad who are still who want the project to happen, basically, right? But there are other actors who are against the project and became allies for these indigenous groups. So one main thing is that alliances or coalitions, when we talked about them initially as a inter-actor alliance. So this actor with this actor and this actor, but we actually needed to consider the fact that coalitions also occur within actors. So in this case, within the indigenous groups, because indigenous groups not necessarily are homogeneous, right? Actually, they are very complex, heterogeneous groups. And so one main strategy was to like find, to achieve the cohesion within their group, within the indigenous peoples. And so in Colombia, it was very important, the unity of the resguardo, and in Bolivia, the unity of the Mancomunidad as an internal alliance, right? Sorry, and this is very important for both power with, which is collective power, and power within, which is internal power, right? And then talking about the alliances with other actors, right? In Colombia, there were some alliances, but in Colombia, one thing that we are beginning to analyze is that maybe in Colombia, like external alliances were like important, but in Bolivia, they were like very important. Like in Bolivia, the alianza with Universidad allowed them to, for example, sorry, Valentin, or did someone talk? Okay.
That's okay, Jazmin. I will control.
Okay. In Bolivia, the alianza with the Universidad de San Andrés produced some technical studies to help them in their political mobilization processes, and other alliances as well with activists and NGOs. One of the things is that some of these alliances were only known by, or were better known by the dirigentes, by the leaders of these indigenous groups. And so there is also this issue about trusting and legitimacy of the leaders within these groups. Political mobilization in Colombia was very important. They did some processes that reveal the importance of not only the collective power, but also the symbolic power. So, for example, when the engineers of the companies arrived to the territory without permission, they proceeded to take their expensive equipment, and that way the engineers basically follow them looking for their equipment to the resguardo, right? And so that put them in control of the situation. And of course, there were some reclamos to the national government. Again, this reveals the importance of the legitimacy of the leadership and the internal cohesion of the resguardo indígena. In Bolivia, political mobilization was also important, especially when the vigilia, what they call the vigilia, which is some sort of movement that basically like involved all the communities from the resguardo coming down to the nearest city with their flechas in their boats, and basically to stop the entrance of to restrict the entrance of outsiders to the territory. And so this was a very important moment for them. It's something that they remember a lot, because they actually managed the company to leave, because the company at certain point didn't have any food, because they hadn't allowed food to come into the territory, or like equipment or materials, right? And there were also some denuncias at the international events, such as the United Nations meeting, where they actually ended up sending a message to the Bolivian government demanding respect for indigenous people's rights. About legal strategies, in both cases, they were very important, but in different ways. And this is very interesting, because in Bolivia, on one hand, one of the main arguments was that they needed to do some, they needed to implement the previous prior consultation to indigenous peoples. But in Colombia, actually the strategy was to say no to the consultation. Basically it was a way to delay the process, and also because they didn't trust the way consultation has been regulated in Colombia. Like Iya said, those decretillos tienen una cantidad de micos, like those decrees have like several like hidden, like not very convenient details. And so what they want is actually to create their own indigenous consultation protocol. About the fortalecimiento de capacidades, capacity building, this is very important in both cases, but it's not the type of capacity building that we usually think about. It's not like, oh, let's capacitar these people. No, it was actually like more, it was a combination of leadership skills, but also of, in case of Colombia, for example, spiritual and cultural knowledge as well. Killa, for example, had like had this traditional knowledge that she learned from her family, who were also leaders in the community, and in Bolivia, and Valentin and Señor Valentin, Señor Domingo, and other leaders from the Mancomunidad were having presence in debates and workshops to like have a more technical arguments to like basically build the argument against the project, right? So you can see that capacity building can work in different ways, right? In one country, it was more like linked to the spiritual side. I mean, in both cases, right? But in the other case, the technical part was very key as well. And in both cases, they are currently building capacities for leaderships in their own communities. Like that's something that's going on in both cases. And then it's also important to highlight that in Colombia there was this parallel process going on, which was the process to achieve the ampliación to increase legally the territory of the resguardo. And this was very important for them to be taken seriously when the roads projects started happening, right? So with the territory already legalized, they had like a more basically more authority to say we don't want this project to come this way. But there were also some personal safety strategies that, for example, perhaps we didn't pay too much attention before, and these are very important to protect the safety of these indigenous leaders who have been receiving threats and suffering threats of violence, right? This is but the internal power of Kia, for example, was very important because she decided to stop hiding and get empowered with the spiritual ceremonies in the resguardo, with the ancianos and everything, and that gave her the strength that she needed to basically go and face the actors that she needed to face, such as the comunidades campesinas, which actually she kind of managed to she made them rethink their position about the project, right? So and I think this is the last thing I need to say about effectiveness of as a preliminary finding, is that effectiveness of strategy have occurred by phases. And it occurred by phases, and it also occurred how can I put it, it's not that it's not final, the process keeps going, it's ongoing right now. The project has been paused but not canceled in both cases, and so because of different factors and phases and exogenous factors going on, the isolated effect of these strategies remains uncertain. We can talk about processes, but not about. It's better to talk about processes than about the effectiveness of strategies alone, right? The other thing is that in Bolivia, it was important, the effectiveness not only in terms of pausing the project, but also effectiveness in terms of achieving cohesion of communities. And so, for example, in Bolivia, in phase 1, the vigilia was the main strategy to achieve to make the engineers leave the territory, right? But this was also affected by the context of this kinds of sort of conflict between the empresas contratistas, right, that the government had hired for the project, and so this gave them power with it. But in a second phase, the government changed strategy, and the government started, and the companies started making a campaign to basically, like an interview said, to buy communities, to make them be in favor of the project and desprestigiar the mancomunidad. And so because of this, the mancomunidad also had to change their own strategy and basically focus on information and communication to the comunidades of the mancomunidad. And this ended up in actually not this was the moment of less effectiveness, because there were divisions, and an empresa ended up finishing the studies, the design studies for the project. And in phase 3, the mancomunidad made an alliance with Universidad San Andrés and the media to show through studies that this project is not economically, socially, or environmentally feasible. But this also was at the same time that Evo Morales left the government. So, as I said, the effect of these different strategies cannot be analyzed in isolating them from the exogenous factors or the events going on in the country, right? And also because the government didn't fulfill the promises, the most of the communities were ended up being against the project, and so the project ended up being paused or dormido, right? In Colombia, it was also by phases. At the beginning, like this was years ago. This project started like decades ago, actually. And from like the abuelos, like the grandparents from the resguardo, basically like reached some sort of agreement to make like a very small road, right? Like a via terciaria. And then this project was in agenda. But then decades passed. From the past times, only 5 abuelos are still alive. And what the government did was to like basically change the name and redesign the project. And what they wanted was to make a bigger project. And also they didn't like consult again, because they said, oh, but we already talked with you about this. But this was like decades ago, and from those times, almost no one lives anymore. And so this is when Resguardo Yunguillo in Colombia said no to like the preconsulta, and said no to the consulta, and confiscated equipment, achieved the territory, the ampliación, achieved the legal recognition of their territory, and also like basically occurred everything that I said before about the comunidades campesinas and capacity building and spiritual capacities building. All this happened in this moment. And right now, the project is also dormido, or like paused, but it actually is not completely dormido, because they have been finishing these studies, not so much doing fieldwork, but using, for example, geospatial data to do that. And so this is just to say that there were many exogenous factors that you saw in the previous slides that were very relevant to shape the effectiveness, the implementation and the effectiveness of the strategies, right? But also the objectives of the strategies, like the position of the comunidades, and also the position of the comunidades campesinas in Colombia, for example, right? And some of the communities from the Mancomunidad. And so I would like to highlight 2 things. In Colombia, the context about the legal recognition of the territory was key. And in Bolivia, the fact that Evo Morales left the government was also key. Some preliminary conclusions before we go to questions and comments also from Valentin and all of you. First is that we need to look to have an integral perspective. Let's talk about processes. So strategies are part of processes, right? But the strategies are, we cannot understand these strategies, the goals, the implementation, and the effectiveness without first looking at the internal governance and cohesion of the indigenous groups. So looking not only at actors, but also at looking at dynamics within actors. The second thing that we have to take into account are not only the social environmental actors, or in this case, like indigenous groups that are the focus of our research, but also how pro-infrastructure actors act, and what are their strategies, right? And what are their achievements, and what are their failures, you know, and this is very key. Then we have to take on account the exogenous contextual factors that can actually make the difference, such as, for example, the fact that Evo Morales left the government in Bolivia in that moment. But also other processes, other luchas, such as the territory of the lucha for the territorio, you know, of Yunguillo was very important. So the different luchas are interlinked, right? And for example, in Bolivia, the fact that the Mancomunidad has been the main organization helping them with the COVID situation also helped to build this cohesion within the Mancomunidad, the comunidades, right? So other luchas are linked to the luchas related to infrastructure projects. And so again, the isolated effect of the strategies is uncertain. So it might be useful to examine the effectiveness of processes and synergies rather than the effectiveness of individual strategies. So the other conclusion is that the approach or that guides the position of actors, it's complex, and of course in this case, in these two cases, the political ecology approach was basically dominant, right? It was like the one that stood up the most, right? But different groups and different actors and different strategies can fit in with either of these approaches, depending on, there are differences between and within actors, and also the variations across times. And also I would like to highlight here what we learned from Colombia about the desmodernization ecological, like ecological demodernization, I don't know how to say that, as a approach, you know, that we need to think about this more. The other thing is that it's not only about the governance, as I said, between the social environmental between one certain environmental actor and other actors, but it's also the governance within one actor, in this case within the mancomunidad and within the resguardo, the trust and the legitimacy between them, the legitimacy of the leaders, of their traditional authorities and indigenous leaders was key, and the way how they came together to basically take a position as a group, and to trust what their leaders were doing. For example, in political mobilization processes, where maybe not everybody in the community like knew exactly, for example, what was the terms of agreement with Universidad San Andrés, but they knew it was something they could trust their leaders with. And then you saw this through the presentation, the internal power, like power within, and the collective power are interlinked, right? So this was key for both the implementation and the effectiveness of the strategies. And so collective internal, so the collective power within with the resguardos and within the communities, and within the mancomunidad, the spiritual power and ontological power as well, of like how they see the world and how they connect with their spiritual side, was also a source of power. And the political power, which has to do with the internal governance that I told you in the previous slide, but also the fact that they have rights as indigenous peoples, and these rights are recognized not only by national law, but also by international law, you know. And so even if they distrust national laws, such as in Colombia, that they want to make their own indigenous protocol for prior consultation, they know these rights are, you know, theirs. Definitely, we cannot look at the social environmental actors alone. We need to see how the power game is with the actors that have opposing interests. And so the main sources of power that infrastructure actors that were promoting these infrastructure projects used was political power, economic power, ideological power, and ontological power. As we already saw, adaptation is key. Strategies can and should change over time to enhance effectiveness, and both sectors, the social environmental sector and infrastructure sector, adapted their strategies to the intermediate results and to the actors with opposing interests and to changes in the context. And that's it. Thank you.
Hey, Jazmin, thank you so much for the presentation. I don't know if you want to pass to the others as you told me before, or because we have some in the chat, some reflections for Bob, Vanessa, Stephen, have some questions from Claudia and Ganga. So what do you want to do? Pass to your partners, or we can go to the...
I would like to definitely give a moment to at least like a couple of minutes to Valentin to say, perhaps express some opinions before, and also like encourage him to encourage people to ask him questions too, if they want to clarify some aspects about the Bolivian case. So, señor Valentín, si usted desea decir algo, please, we would love to hear from you as well. Nos gustaría escuchar de usted, disculpe. Sí.
Diga ele para...
Está
señor,
tiene
señor
que sacar
Valentín,
su micrófono, don
que,
Valentín.
Sí.
No lo escuchamos, don Valentín. Tiene que activar su micrófono.
Sí, estoy...
Ahora sí.
Ahí está. Sí.
Ahora
Está bien.
sí.
Muy bien. Gracias por la invitación. Es bueno participar en estos escenarios, puesto que toda la presentación está en inglés, pero también está en español las respuestas. Un poco me complicó leerlo, pero de todas maneras algo es recopilado de todo, pero eso es el resultado de acuerdo a las entrevistas de las comunidades. También nosotros hemos aportado a esto. Aún todavía falta, ¿no? Porque muchas cosas aquí en Bolivia está pasando. Hoy por hoy estamos en una persecución política y la división está con más fuerza. Nuevas organizaciones nacionales. Eso va a arrancar, digamos, algunos proyectos extractivismo, tanto sea minera, en la explotación minera en áreas protegidas, la explotación de hidrocarburos, exploración por lo mismo. Y allá atrás va lo que es la construcción de hidroeléctrica en el Chepetebala, ¿no? Eso estamos esperando, porque creo del anterior Evo Morales en su gestión, y ahora es Luis Arce Catacora, es de la misma sigla, del mismo color. No ha cambiado nada. Quizás con más fuerza ahora están aplicando, pero eso es una gran preocupación. Pero nosotros como pueblos indígenas, a pesar que hay muchas leyes que nos favorecen, está dentro de la constitución política en favor de los pueblos indígenas, y además hay convenios internacionales como la 169, los tratados de la ONU, y también respalda en Bolivia, ¿no? Eso es un poco que nos queremos agarrar nosotros, ¿no? Yo creo que vamos a exigir el cumplimiento a los gobernantes, ¿no? Y bueno, de todas maneras agradecer nomás, ¿no? Eso quiero decir por hoy. Estamos firmes para la resistencia, estamos nomás, no es como que algo el proyecto Chepetebala está dormido, también nuestra resistencia no está dormida. Seguimos vigentes, sigue en nuestras cabezas, sigue en nuestras ideas, en nuestros pensamientos, sigue en nuestros sentimientos, aún está viva, ¿no? Eso en cuanto quiero aportar, ¿no? Si algo más, quizás algún rato puedo seguir aportando. Gracias, Jazmin.
A usted, señor Valentín.
Senhor Valentim, Vanessa tiene, vamos a preguntar para ella ahora, ya que está hablando. Vanessa, si tú quieres, adelante.
Gracias, Sinomar. Bueno, Jazmin, gracias por la presentación. Es bastante interesante, bueno, todo lo que se ha logrado en tan poco tiempo y desde remotamente en coproducción con los líderes Pero esta pregunta va para Valentín, aprovechando la oportunidad de que él está acompañándonos. ¿Cómo ve que esta investigación puede aportar a sus procesos de gobernanza en el futuro? Y si tiene alguna predicción de cuál va a ser el camino del proyecto hidroeléctrico, si es que cree que esta lucha va a ser continua en contra del proyecto o si, no sé, va a haber algún cambio con la nueva dirección política que Bolivia está tomando ahora. ¿Cuál es como su predicción en base a la experiencia que ya tienen?
Bueno, nuestra proyección, digamos, es anular, digamos, el decreto, ¿no? Derogar en su totalidad, ¿no? Pero eso es lo que nosotros luchábamos, ¿no? Si haya entrado otro gobierno, como dice la derecha, la izquierda, o sea, así de la derecha, eso no nos interesa el color político, sino la intención de resguardar lo que es la naturaleza, respetar las áreas protegidas. Eso es lo que nos interesa a nosotros, porque lo demás creo que es cosas secundarias. Entonces nosotros lo que estamos luchando acá es que respeten nuestros derechos de los pueblos indígenas, así como ha salido bajo un decreto, como dice el reconocimiento, que el reconocimiento no era, digamos, necesario, porque esto de la República, los pueblos siempre existíamos, no era necesario el reconocimiento, pero ellos lo tomaron como un reconocimiento a los pueblos indígenas, a los 36 naciones, y con eso actualmente se hace plurinacional, imagínense, ¿no? Y después luego se crean las áreas protegidas, más 22 áreas protegidas, en eso están las municipales, departamentales, todo. Pero tampoco se está respetando, ¿no? Y muchas leyes se están derogando debajo de la mesa, de acuerdo a sus intenciones, ¿no? Entonces, lo que nosotros actualmente estamos pidiendo, la derogación, ¿no? Del decreto de la construcción de estas hidroeléctricas, ¿no? Entonces, ojalá, como acabo de decir, actualmente está en una convulsión social, está por convertirse en una convulsión social, así como salió Evo Morales. Creo que estamos calculando, Arce Catacora va a salir por lo mismo. Ojalá que eso se logre, pero también decimos, ¿no? Hasta llegar así, ¿cuántos hermanos, nuestros hermanos van a perder la vida? Eso es algo un poco preocupante también, porque no es tan fácil, ¿no? Como ellos tienen gente inocente que han mentido y siguen mintiendo, siguen haciendo creer que el más siempre les va a llevar buen camino, ¿no? Entonces yo creo que no es cierto, ¿no? Estamos en eso, ¿no? Nada más. No sé si he podido responder a la expectativa de acuerdo a su pregunta. Gracias.
Sí, claro. Gracias, Valentín. Yo voy a permanecer en español. I'm speaking Spanish because I think we have some questions, and I will pass to Percy first, and next Ganga, so that they can ask, because the others are all reflection, and we leave to them at the final. Thank you, Percy.
Bueno, muchas gracias, Jazmin, por esta excelente presentación. Jazmin me invitó, bueno, voy a hablar en español, creo casi todos entienden bien y cualquier cosa podemos conversar. Jazmin me invitó a participar, a apoyarla en el proceso hace unas semanas y he venido aprendiendo de la lucha que están haciendo tanto líderes como Valentín, como Domingo y como la señora Quilla, tanto en Bolivia como en Colombia, ¿no? A pesar de las limitaciones económicas muchas veces, técnicas también que tienen estos líderes en el campo para luchar en contra de estos proyectos que vienen con mucho dinero, con mucho poder político, han podido mantener la fuerza, han podido mantener el momentum, ¿no? Para, en estos casos, para posponer, para resistir que se hayan seguido adelante estos dos procesos, ¿no? Si bien por el momento estos dos procesos, como menciona Jazmin, están dormidos, están suspendidos, no han sido cancelados. Entonces, en cualquier momento, las condiciones pueden ser tales de que estos proyectos vuelvan a reactivarse, ¿no? Me gustaría también comentar, ¿no? Que en lo que he estado viendo este proceso, hay que ser claros de que han tenido en los dos casos serias deficiencias técnicas, los proyectos, y han tenido deficiencias legales también, que han permitido que los movimientos de lucha, tanto en el área de Bolivia como en Colombia, hayan podido participar en defender estos proyectos por el momento. Pero yo considero muy importante, don Valentín, ¿no? y el resto de ustedes que están en el campo, de seguir manteniendo la fuerza, seguir estando alertas, seguir manteniendo alianzas con grupos claves, ¿no? Y seguir informándose ustedes, informando a sus comunidades e informando a la población de las ciudades más grandes, de tanto Bolivia como en Colombia, que muchas veces pienso que porque ellos no entienden todo el proceso y no entienden la historia de lucha que ustedes han venido haciendo todo este tiempo. Muchas veces, mucha población de estos países están a favor de los proyectos sin entender la realidad que ustedes están viviendo en el campo. Esto solamente quería agregar. Y muchas gracias nuevamente.
Gracias.
Okay. Thank you, Percy. Jazmin, do you want to comment?
Oh,
Or-
yes, sure. I mean, yes, this what Percy just said, definitely it's key, and it's linked to what we've concluded about the importance of the context and exogenous factors, and it's impossible to analyze the effectiveness of strategies without taking those into consideration. The technical, for example, in Bolivia, the technical weaknesses of the project, for example, were exactly the were the ones that the study made by Universidad San Andrés showed at certain point. Ay, español, ¿verdad? Perdón. Lo que decía era de que las fallas técnicas, por ejemplo, en el caso del proyecto de Bolivia, fueron visibilizadas gracias a la alianza de la mancomunidad con la Universidad de San Andrés y con algunos políticos de oposición también, ¿no? Y esas deficiencias técnicas son importantes y en general todos los factores exógenos y contextuales son claves para poder entender digamos, la efectividad y la complejidad detrás de los resultados de esas estrategias, ¿no? Y sí, eso fue clave, por ejemplo, ¿no? Como digo, en Bolivia. Y creo que respondiendo a Marta, creo que, por ejemplo, una de las cosas principales, una de las aspectos principales en esas deficiencias técnicas y legales era que el proyecto iba, la cantidad de energía que se iba a producir con ese proyecto hidroeléctrico y la cantidad de ganancias o el precio que iban digamos, a cobrar a Brasil por esa energía no compensaban los costos de inversión del proyecto, ¿no? Entonces, eso era una parte, por ejemplo, importante. Y no sé, hay varias preguntas, a ver si Nomar puede decirme cuál.
Sí, claro, tiene muchas. Una que ha pasado es que están preguntándose cómo se fue útil la investigación para la comunidad. Es una pregunta para Valentín, ¿no? Yo no sé si Bob quiere preguntar también.
Jazmin.
Escuchamos.
A
Usted.
ver, ¿me podía volver a aclarar la pregunta, por favor?
Valentín, están
Hola.
preguntando.
¿Me podía aclarar la pregunta? Sí,
Ok,
sí.
¿se me escucha? ¿Cómo se fue útil? ¿Cómo
Sí.
se dice, Jazmin? Útil.
La pregunta, sí, la pregunta, gracias, Sinomar. La pregunta es, señor Valentín, ¿de qué manera este proyecto está siendo útil o va a ser útil para ustedes?
Excelente. Bueno, para nosotros, por ejemplo, va a ser útil esta investigación, el resultado final. Quizás con estas podemos ir a socializar las comunidades, porque son los resultados de ellas mismas, ¿no? Sus mismas expresiones, un poco se ha transcrito, digamos, ¿no? Entonces va a ser útil para nosotros, ¿no? No solamente las comunidades, ¿no? También para otras. Nosotros en realidad esto no solamente estamos involucrando, digamos, las comunidades, también con algunas invitaciones, algunos seminarios, foros o otros eventos que se lleva, siempre estamos mencionando nuestras preocupaciones, ¿no? Porque la afectación que va a realizar no es solamente a nuestras comunidades. Eso deben entender, ¿no? Por ejemplo, nosotros nos lo vemos así como dos partes, ¿no? Occidente, que es decir, los compañeros que están en el occidente, donde hace frío, y la Amazonía, los amazónicos, estamos los indígenas, ¿no? Entonces, si es que se construye, va a ser un impacto total, no solamente para nosotros, ¿no? Para las ciudades que están cerca, también para el occidente, ¿no? Entonces, va a ser un lago artificial y un espejo para el espacio, y cuántos impactos más mayores va a causar, ¿no? Entonces, para nosotros, esto va a ser muy útil. Yo, a mi manera de ver, ¿no? Estoy viéndoles.
Sí, tenemos la pregunta de Ganga. So, Ganga, do you want to ask Jazmin directly your question? So, if
Sure. Hi, Jasmine. Thank you so much for the amazing presentation. I was curious about, you mentioned about how some of the communities rejected the project, and I saw similarities in my country that also we also have this rejection. I was wondering if you could, the reason why the rejection was because they have not been involved or engaged from the beginning of the project, and that's why they rejected it. I was curious whether you also find something similar in the place that you were working. That's the number one question. And the second one is that I was astonished by the voice from the ground that, you know, they don't want the idea of modernization. And I was curious whether you had an opportunity to ask their perspective about what modernization is, because at the end of the day, we talk about infrastructure. A project is like what I call two-sided sword. You can just like use it whatever we want to use it. So yeah, thank you. Is it clear, my question?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, thank
very
you.
relevant too. So the first question, in this case, in these two cases, I'm not generalizing that this happens everywhere, but at least in these two cases, the opposition to the projects were not only based in the fact that they were not consulted, but also that position against the projects was based on the fact that they actually don't want these projects to happen. Like they actually, they talked about the affectations to the territories, to the livelihoods, to the environment, to the territorial autonomy you know, to what extent they can maintain the control over that that area, you know. And this is linked to the second question that you asked. The fact that, for example, in Colombia, the position of the resguardo was against this project as it is, because this project is like this road project involves like this very modern or like big or large scale road, right? All they wanted was this via terciaria, like a trocha, you know, like so that they can actually like, you know, just move themselves, but at the same time, not only move around by themselves, but to kind of limit to what extent others can actually move around that region, right? So it's a way to control the entrance of people to the area and to maintain, as they said, their autonomy, territorial autonomy. And so when we talked about modernization, well, of course, when we talk about ecological modernization, that's a theoretical term, you know, that even, for example, even though we don't talk about ecological modernization in these terms, we do talk about the characteristics of the roads, or the type of model or development model or like livelihoods model that they want for their own communities. And so we translate that, like we are saying that the research team, we translate that and interpret that in terms of the two theoretical approaches that we talked about first, ecological modernization and political ecology. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, thank you.
So thank you everybody for being here. We went over the time, so just Marlies, can you ask please?
¿Cómo están? Muy buenas tardes. Primeramente quiero saludar a don Valentín. ¿Cómo está? Un gusto verlo nuevamente, compañero de luchas de hace mucho tiempo. Y nada, felicitarlo también a Jazmin, que han logrado tener estos resultados que nos parecen muy buenos. Recién estamos empezando, pero nada, hay que seguir, ¿no? Justamente quería hacer un comentario que me parece muy importante. El día de ayer teníamos igual un evento con las hermanas Lourdes Miranda, Rudalí Paz y Lidia Anti, estas lideresas tan grandes que forman toda la coalición en contra de las represas de la Amazonía de Bolivia. Tenemos a Lidia Anti con el tema de Cachola Esperanza, la binacional, tenemos a Lourdes con la de Rositas y tenemos a Rudalí Paz, que bueno, que es vecina ahí de don Valentín Luna, ¿no? Con el tema de las mancomunidades también. Y ellas mencionaban cosas muy importantes y cosas que se refieren mucho a lo que ustedes mismos ya han mencionado en el estudio, ¿no? O sea, vemos que estas cosas se van repitiendo una y otra vez, el tema de la falta de comunicación, de la falta de información, de la falta de alianzas, de que el gobierno realmente no tome en cuenta las consultas previas, informadas, ni nada de esas cosas, ¿no? Y una de las preguntas que se les hacía a ellas era: ¿qué pasa? me muteaste. Bueno, entonces la pregunta era, ¿cómo avanzamos? Después de tanto tiempo de luchas, después de tanto tiempo, digamos que nos venimos articulando, que venimos teniendo sinergias, que queremos involucrar a la academia, que se quieren involucrar organizaciones, al tema del gobierno. Entonces, don Valentín, desde su punto de vista, ¿cómo avanzamos? ¿Cómo podemos hacer para fortalecernos entre todos y para crear esa conciencia, no solamente a nivel de campo, sino también a nivel de ciudad? ¿Cuál sería su opinión respecto al tema? ¿Cómo seguimos hacia adelante? ¿Qué necesitamos para seguir avanzando?
Señor Valentín, está mutado. Sí.
Hola. Hola.
Ahora sí.
Oh. No, le habla don Domingo Campo de la Mancomunidad de Comunidades. Buenas tardes. Si puedo participar.
Por supuesto, sino que no sabíamos que usted estaba ahí, señor Domingo. Como tiene el nombre, no tiene su nombre ahí, pero por supuesto, más bien, bienvenido. Y gracias por estar aquí.
Gracias. Bien, un saludo cordial, pues, Jazmin, y gracias a los participantes porque son parte de anímica de toda esta lucha que se hace. No es una lucha regional, es una lucha global. En realidad, lo que la Mancomunidad de Comunidades desde su fundación, desde el 2001, ha empezado haciendo que se respeten derechos. Derechos de territorio de los pueblos indígenas, derechos humanos, derechos a la madre naturaleza, derechos de las mujeres, de los ríos, la vida. Entonces, estamos sumados en este propósito de que los gobiernos que sean de turno, de izquierdas o derechas porque son iguales, tienen el mismo accionar porque obedecen a un sistema. Y esto es lo que perjudica a nuestros pueblos. En realidad yo he sido parte muy de cerca de lo que se ha hecho este estudio. Gracias por encomendarnos esto, Jazmin. Esto nos ha ayudado a comprender muchas de las cosas que habían un poco ocultas dentro de nuestras comunidades. No sabíamos muy de cerca el pensamiento de ellos. Nunca hemos visibilizado, por ejemplo, el pensamiento de una comunidad que se llama Corte y su líder decía, el gobierno nunca nos ha tomado en cuenta como existencia. Nos creían animales porque han dicho que no existimos y era verdad. Y parece que eso nunca se ha mencionado. Lo que decía la compañera, una pregunta, Valentín, lo que puedo decirles es que ya nosotros acá en Bolivia hemos empezado pues a tener conexiones entre lo rural y también la ciudad. Ha habido colectivos de chicas en la ciudad de La Paz, por ejemplo, que han estado articulando sus acciones para poder apoyar al grupo de la Mancomunidad de Comunidades. Entonces, yo creo que esto hay que fortalecer, hay que agrandar, hay que reforzar, porque en primera instancia nuestros aliados han sido instituciones estratégicas que aunque se den tiempos difíciles en materia de política, hemos agarrado, por ejemplo, a la Universidad Mayor de San Andrés, aunque hayan estos golpes de Estado, lo que llaman, no podían afectarles a ellos. Entonces era un aliado importante para nosotros, al igual que la Asamblea Permanente de Derechos Humanos de Bolivia y también la Iglesia Católica, que no hemos podido consolidar. Sí hemos tenido grandes acercamientos con ellos, se han llevado eventos, como le digo, participativos, donde nosotros también estuvimos muy activos. Entonces, esto es de fortalecer porque, como le digo, es una lucha global, interesa a todos y lógicamente los de la ciudad entienden también este problema, cómo están sufriendo la gente o están enfrentando las comunidades. Recuerdo cuando hicimos la primera reunión grande de la Mancomunidad de Comunidades en el Estrecho del Bala, le dimos un tiempo de 72 horas para que abandone el lugar su gente y retiren sus maquinarias, la empresa que estaba a cargo de realizar los estudios que deberían hacerse para poder llevar adelante esta implantación, ¿no?, de las represas Chepetelbala. Después de esta reunión, al siguiente día, Evo Morales como presidente estaba pronunciándose. Nunca había habido una reacción o una reacción de este tipo, ¿no? Tan rápidamente. Él decía, no, bueno, si es que se oponen los hermanos indígenas, no lo vamos a hacer. Pero bueno, era algo que jamás cumplió, ¿no? Entonces, eso más o menos es nuestra proyección futura de reforzar alianzas. Ahora mismo nosotros hemos estado visitando comunidades indígenas, nos han apoyado algunas instituciones para poder llevar alimentos a las comunidades y eso hicimos toda esa temporada y eso nos sirve para reforzar nuestra unidad, ¿no? Eso es lo que estuvimos haciendo todo este tiempo. Pero bueno, hay preocupaciones, los asuntos políticos, lógicamente, que nos afectan, ¿no? Y veremos el desenlace que va a pasar en Bolivia, no sabemos exactamente qué es lo que se viene, pero de alguna forma nos preocupa porque no ha cambiado la visión de desarrollo que tiene el gobierno con respecto a lo que hacía más antes Evo Morales. Es el mismo sistema, el extractivismo duro que nos hace pensar qué estrategias asumimos luego. Pero bueno, muchas cosas vienen en el camino y las vamos asumiendo para poder practicarlas, ¿no? Llevarlas adelante. Bueno, gracias por el tiempo.
Sí, muchas gracias, señor Domingos.